Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to QED to also invite the Commission to present its thoughts on the modernization of the public procurement package in the EU. And after having listened to the excellent presentation by Erik Nooteboom, I am convinced that we will be able to rapidly do what is necessary in the field of procurement to make it simpler, cheaper, and also more modern. For what Madame Rühle has said corresponds to a large extent, I would think, with the Commission agenda on this issue. Now let me start by saying what has already been said in the introductory remarks. It is quite amazing to see how public procurement has climbed the ladder of priorities in the EU. When I started to work in this field some 4 years ago, it was considered to be still a very technical area where only experts were concerned about and that the rest of the world did not really care. 4 years later, I must say that public procurement appears as a very important topic on basically every policy communication which looks forward into how we should stimulate growth in the EU. As you know, it's one of the 12 priority initiatives announced in the Single Market Act to stimulate growth, and I can assure you that in the mind of Commissioner Barnier, it is within these 12 priorities, it's one of the top priorities. Of course, it's not a surprise, because if you look into the value of procurement in the EU, the simple fact that some 18% of EU GDP is spent on procurement contracts is very telling. It means in terms of value that 2.2 trillion euros are spent on an annual basis in the EU on government contracts, spending public monies. The legislative package we are talking about, the EU acquis, so to say, which was adopted in 2004, covers 20% of that expenditure. So 20% of this 2.2 trillion euros which are spent on an annual basis have to be procured according to the EU procurement rules, and if you make a quick calculation, that means that we are talking about 380 to 400 billion euros spent on an annual basis. Now, the 2004 package has introduced some very basic principles. It basically constitutes a toolbox which does not impose on procuring entities how to procure and what they should buy, but it provides them with a toolbox of kits it can use in order to well spend the public money. We are currently running, as you know, an evaluation of the effects which this 2004 package has produced. And some of our stakeholders have asked a very pertinent question: why, Commission, are you now already starting to redo, to modernize that system which has only been adopted 7 years ago and which in some member states was only transposed into national legislation only 2 to 3 years ago? I think that the answer to that question is that we always have to be proactive, and we always have to see whether we can make things better, especially in times of economic crisis and in times where we have a very ambitious 2020 agenda. So there is no reason, I would say, to wait another 3 or 4 years before starting to look into the question whether we can improve, so to say, the procurement scheme in the EU. Public spending is just too important to leave it aside, and especially in today's economy and today's crisis. So that is why Commissioner Barnier and the College considered that we should pick our procurement as one of the key actions, and that we should follow up the evaluation rapidly with a modernization of the existing EU procurement scheme. You already heard that this project has gained lots of interest all over the EU, and I can tell you not only all over the EU but also at the global level. Many states, for example our partners in the World Trade Organization, which have subscribed to the government procurement agreement, these are the major industrialized economies on the globe. These partners are also closely watching what is taking place in Europe, because we are front runners, so to say. We are the first to take a fresh look on procurement rules, and we may be the first to introduce new principles and new concepts into procurement legislation. And the international community is following very closely with great interest what is going on here in Europe. They will of course also carefully check whether what we are about to do will be in line with our international commitments. For the EU has subscribed to a series of international commitments under the Government Procurement Agreement, which may impact on some initiatives which we might wish to launch, and we have to be sure that we stay within, so to say, the international context. And if we were not to stay within this context, we will have to negotiate some international commitments in this field. As Heidi Rühle has already eloquently explained, there are, I think, a couple of key issues which we are looking into and which were the subject, I would say, of a very successful conference, public hearing on the 30th of June, to which members of parliament, the most eloquent members in the field of procurement, participated. Business was largely represented, but also procuring authorities and providers were very much present. We should not forget that procurement is not only an issue for procuring entities, for those who buy, but it is very much also an issue for those who supply the goods and the services. And of course it is also very much an issue for the consumers, because at the end the money spent by public contracts is taxpayers' money. So what we are talking about at the end is a sound management of the monies which have been generated by the European taxpayers. And that puts some very clear borders to the exercise we are running. Now the key word of this exercise we are currently into is, I think, simplification, to render the whole process simpler, better to understand, not only for procuring entities but also for those who want to participate in the bidding. And I would also say it should also be a project which simplifies things for the citizens of Europe, that they better understand what is taking place with their monies and what are the main purposes of procurement rules. We should not forget that there is lots of skepticism all around Europe if one talks about procurement. Citizens are mostly satisfied when in their local environment monies are spent by the communities, the cities and the provinces, because they feel that is good for themselves, they feel it in their own pocket and they are happy for their neighbors or the SMEs, and they are less enthusiastic when it appears that contracts are won by companies which come out from a different member state or even further away. That is why we need to clarify and to make clear messages when we develop our new policies, what the procurement finally is about. And I think that with respect to the core issue, procurement, the message continues to be that it is to make sure that we get the best value for the money spent. That's in the interest of the consumers, in the interest of the economy. Now, new issues come in, of course, in particular the question whether these public money should also be spent to serve other purposes, such as the green, environmental policies, social policies, to support SMEs. And of course these are issues which should be taken into account when one talks about an efficient and a sustainable procurement environment. But at the end of the road, the final question is whether the monies have been well spent and whether the public gets the best value for money. Now we are trying as a Commission, after having gone through a long consultation process, to find the right balance between the best way to spend your money, but also to serve other important policy issues. Let me just elaborate upon a couple of these issues. To start with simplification and reduction of administrative burden, so to say, I think there is a large consensus within the EU institutions, but also from all stakeholders, that, for example, what we should do is to render the process simpler. For example, by no longer requiring every bidder in a process to generate, as from the start, all the necessary paperwork to the procuring authority, whereas in most of the cases all this paperwork has been generated without any purpose, since at the end only one bidder can win. So it makes complete sense to say that this paperwork should only be generated at the end of the process by the winning bidder. Effectively, this is the system referred to as the self-declaration system, which means that, of course, any bidder should, as from the outset, declare that he fulfills with all the requirements which he will have to prove at the end of the process. It is a simple measure, it makes complete sense. And by the way, it has been suggested already in an earlier exercise which we went through under Commissioner Verheugen, who, as you will remember, launched the administrative burden program, which was a very important program and to reduce administrative burden for business. And one of the issues which we discussed in the